Okay, hi everyone. This is Gwen Foster. We're going to talk about the brain tonight, and some of you that have been to workshops of mine for a while are going to hear a little bit of repeat information in the beginning about specific amino acids, but then we're going to go into some tangents that have to do with the announcement I sent out and talk about bipolar and manic and learning and sleep. We're going to save like children learning disorders until next month, because I'm going to include that with childhood conditions and other things that are really more specific to children. So just without too much introduction, we're going to just go ahead and get started. This will be recorded or is being recorded. It will be available in the next week or two, and I'll send it out by email. So if you're on my original email list, you will get a copy. And please note, some people are having a problem with when they're downloading. And the way to get around that, if you try to watch this later or send it to someone that has problems watching it later, the trick is to save it to your computer and then view it from your computer, because sometimes depending on your internet speed and bandwidth and download stuff, it may only download like 15 minutes or 20 minutes of the presentation, and then people contact me saying it's not working. So just let them know to save to their computer, and then it should work fine. They should be able to watch it without any problem. So here we go. Okay, so we're going to get right into some specific amino acids and how they have to do with the brain and how they have to do with mood. Tonight's talk is going to be about the brain and mood interchangeably, because they're very much connected to each other. And if someone is deficient, as you'll see through the night, it's going to be a 2-hour talk, and it's pretty filled with information. So you can make notes or you can watch it again. But what I'd recommend you do, just like the first 2 talks that we've done this year, what I prefer you do, and I think it would be helpful, is if you have a notepad and pen, and as you see symptoms that kind of, describe you, I'd put tally marks, like put serotonin on your piece of paper and then make tally marks on how many of these symptoms you have, because that's going to help you kind of self-diagnose or self-determine, if serotonin is something that may be beneficial for you. And then a little bit later on, you're going to see that there's some other things that may be going on, like if you've tried a serotonin product and it didn't work for you, or like dopamine is kind of touchy, because you can have dopamine deficiency, but then you can have dopamine excess, which is totally different symptoms and can be kind of extreme. So we're going to talk about both, like both flip sides of the coin. But I do recommend that you kind of pay attention for yourself, or if you're watching tonight because of someone else dealing with the brain, like Alzheimer's, dementia, we're going to cover those topics too. And you might be able to get some good information for people that you might be trying to help yourself. Okay, so the S group symptoms, if you have serotonin deficiency, could be it's hard for you to go to sleep or hard to stay asleep, often find yourself irritable, your emotions often lack rationality, like people were like, you're emotional for no reason, occasionally experience unexplained tears, noise bothers you more than it used to, or it seems louder than normal. You flare up at others more easily than you used to. You experience unprovoked anger. You find you're more susceptible to pain. So that could be true, like if you have like fibromyalgia or MS, or just generally you seem to have a low tolerance to pain. And you prefer to be left alone. Like even if you have a family, you wish that you could just go off to an island somewhere or go into a bedroom or just be left alone. And you don't want to really be sociable. In fact, you may be turning down social invitations to do things that used to be something you would like to do. Like in Texas, one thing I like is festivals, and so you may say no to festivals if it's something that is serotonin deficient, where you would normally jump at the chance if you were feeling kind of more normal. On serotonin solutions, there's some good information here, because there's a lot of, sometimes the problem with information like this is that you can go buy a product and take it, and then it doesn't work, and then you think the product doesn't work, or there's something else going on that you should know about the product. And so I try to include those type of little tips on each one of these, because many times people will come in and see me as a client and they'll say, oh, I tried that, it didn't work. And what I find a lot of times is there's a reason it didn't work, but even though it might be something that they needed, they just kind of gave up on it, not knowing these little, pieces of, these little pearls, let's say. So 5-HTP is generally the solution for serotonin solutions. 5-HTP is 5-hydroxytryptophan, and it converts to serotonin through the pineal gland process and then to melatonin. So I don't recommend actually that you take just melatonin. Some people take melatonin also for sleep, but melatonin does not give you serotonin. It does not work backwards. So if someone does get some relief from sleep, for instance, because of taking melatonin, they're probably also missing serotonin, and you probably have symptoms of the ones that we just covered. Also, calcium is important for the conversion. If you're calcium deficient and you take 5-HTP, it may not work because the conversion may not happen. And I found this many times with people who don't sleep, and they'll say, oh, I tried 5-HTP, I tried melatonin, I tried this and that, and none of it worked. I bet they didn't try calcium along with 5-HTP because together it almost always works. You should watch the label for 5-HTP products for peak X-free. You definitely want to see that it's peak X-free. That's just something to know. I don't know all the background. Peak X is bad, let's just say that. But I don't know why it's bad, and some products cost a little more that are peak X-free, but you definitely want to buy the peak X-free 5-HTP products. I would start with 50 milligrams 30 minutes before bed, and it's best to take on an empty stomach with 4 ounces of juice, like apple or grape juice. And if you are not really tolerant to juice, you can actually just do an ounce of juice, like a Dixie cup worth. There's something in the fructose or juice that makes the 5-HTP work better, and so it is actually preferred to take it with a small amount of juice. It can be pineapple or other juices too, but apple or grape are fine. And it's even best to take it with unsweetened. So like juicy juice or the unsweetened, or especially the organic juices are preferred to take the 5-HTP. So what you would do is increase every 50 milligrams every few nights until you get up to 200 milligrams, and then stay at that level for several weeks before reevaluating if you should take more. I have some clients that take 400 milligrams of 5-HTP a day. I used to. I used to have fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and all that stuff. By the way, this information, I want to give credit where it's due throughout the presentation. This information, this first little section, is thanks to Dr. Roger Murphy, who is one of my first teachers over 15 years ago with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, and I was one of those people. And after I heard his talk in Atlanta, I actually took a taxi from the hotel to a health food store and bought 5-HTP because of the information I'm reading to you now. And it was like a miracle. It was like, oh my God, where have you been? And a lot of times when someone's deficient in serotonin, it can take weeks to actually restore the levels. That's why I say that, that go to 200 milligrams for a few weeks before reevaluating if you're trying to do this yourself. When I scan clients, I can kind of see how deficient they are or what I think they need to take. But if you're doing this yourself, do it slowly, decide how much you need. You don't have to run right up to 400 milligrams, but sometimes it's needed. And I see this in kids too, not just in adults. If you have an adverse reaction, which would be you take 5-HTP and you're wide awake, you're also probably a person that would have that same reaction to Benadryl or Tylenol PM or products like that, and this is a liver processing issue. So if you have those issues, like where Benadryl makes you wired instead of sleepy or drowsy, or Dramamine does the opposite, this is usually how your liver's processing things, and it's best then don't take it before bed, take it during the day, and don't wait until bedtime. That's the only thing you have to do different, because it doesn't mean your body's not deficient. It means that your liver may need some extra attention, which we talked about in January in great detail. And then there's a product called Serotoflow, which is by Apex Energetics, and it's a liquid, easily absorbable form of tryptophan, 5-HTP, B6, which also helps with the whole synergy, and fruit extract. And I think it's interesting that in their amino acid sprays that they included a fruit extract. And I mean, I know they did it partially for flavor, but it's also, at least from the kind of biochemistry that I learned, it has to do with absorbability. So, it's kind of genius. One thing I didn't put on the slide that I want to just talk about before we go to dopamine is when someone's on SSRIs, like antidepressants, and we're going to get to depression later, but I want to talk under serotonin. When SSRI would be like Prozac or Wellbutrin, and SSRI stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Now, those drugs do not give you serotonin. Usually people who have depression are deficient in serotonin to begin with, but the drugs help your body utilize the low production of serotonin that you might have, And that's why they generally work for a while and then they stop working. So if you know someone that's been on antidepressants and they've been on them, like at first they were great, and then like a year or two later they kind of didn't work anymore, and then they start playing around with drugs or they start adding drugs and never really take any away, that's actually not good, because if they have the serotonin to begin with, those drugs would even work better, but you're told not to take serotonin products on those drugs. The reason is because you could get too much serotonin like really fast, because an SSRI is going to enhance the serotonin uptake. Now, I'm not going to tell you to get off your antidepressants, but I'm going to tell you that you should either work with an open-minded doctor or talk to somebody about balancing those two, because an SSRI works because you're low in serotonin to begin with. So why not just take serotonin and see what happens? But you cannot come off of antidepressants, you know, like just overnight. I've had clients do it on their own without me telling them to do that, and it's sometimes been a disaster. So you don't want to ever quit an antidepressant because the body becomes dependent on how it works, and you could actually feel worse in a hurry. The next group is opiates. Opiates are very unique. Opiates and dopamine are very similar, and we'll talk about how they're the same or different. So these symptoms are: your life seems incomplete, you feel shy with all but your close friends. So you're not maybe very outgoing unless you're with people you trust or know well. You have feelings of insecurity. You often feel unequal or less than others. When things go right, you sometimes feel undeserving. Like you don't like to take credit for something good that happened, you know, like, oh no, it's okay, you know, I don't want the attention. You feel something is missing in your life. You occasionally feel low self-esteem, low self-worth, or low self-esteem, or low confidence. You feel inadequate as a person, like something feels not completely, you're not feel complete, let's say, like the first thing. You frequently feel fearful when there's nothing to fear. So kind of fear for no reason would be the opiate group. One other thing that we can add here, because it's going to come up in the conversation between dopamine and opiates, is addiction. If there's any addiction issues, especially to drugs and alcohol, but it can be just people who like call themselves an addictive personality, then you're most likely deficient in opiates or dopamine. So the form of opiate or dopamine precursor that I like is DL-phenylalanine. It's a special form of the amino acid phenylalanine. Dopaflow is, again, an Apex Energetics product that's a sorbable form of dopamine with L-phenylalanine, L-tyrosine, and B6. We'll talk about tyrosine a little bit later. It can be extremely helpful in restoring proper opiate levels. So I want to talk about that right now, about addiction. This is the deal. I remember like in the 80s, well, I guess it's the same now, but I'm older, but in the 80s, you know, everyone around, like I was in the restaurant business then, and everyone around was doing cocaine and doing acid and doing ecstasy, and the drugs were like everywhere, and concerts and nightclubs and, you know, stuff like that. And there's definitely two sets of people. There are people that either never tried them or tried them and they didn't really see a difference, which does not make sense to the people who get the big wow out of the opiate drugs, which is that same group, and opium, heroin, all those drugs, crack. The reason is because if someone's opiate deficient and they get an opiate drug, they're going to go like, wow, oh my God, I feel like Superman, I feel awesome, why don't I feel like this every day? And they get addicted. And it's pretty easy to understand when you understand the biochemistry behind it. If someone has normal opiate levels already, they could have tried cocaine and they would be like, I don't get it. Like, why would you spend the money on that? And the people who get something out of cocaine are like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. Are you serious? Like, you don't notice a difference? Because they don't understand that not everybody is an opiate deficient. The other thing about opiates are chocolate, alcohol, cigarettes, or dopamine in like they cause raised dopamine levels. So they're not actually, like alcohol is not actually an opiate, but it has to do with some of the precursors behind how the body produces opiates. So if you're going to take DL-phenylalanine, I would start with 1,000 milligrams, 1 to 2 times daily on an empty stomach, and you can increase up to 4,000 milligrams twice daily until you get to that point that those symptoms are gone, the last screen. If you experience a rapid heartbeat, agitation, or hyperactivity, reduce or stop taking phenylalanine, and consult your doctor if you have high blood pressure, because L-phenylalanine can raise your blood pressure. Not like dangerously high, but if you already have high blood pressure, it could be a risk. You should not take it after 3 p.m. because it can also make you awake. And L-glutamine increases the effectiveness of both DL and L-phenylalanine. So if you take glutamine and phenylalanine together, the phenylalanine works better. We're going to talk about glutamine as the next subject. I want to say one more thing about kids, like teenagers and college kids. If they go, let's say that they're coming up, through the ages, they get to be 16, they're opiate deficient. The first time that they get some alcohol or they get something, a drug, or they try something, that's really, and I feel very strongly about this from what I've seen, that's the determining point. Are they going to be one of those people doing drugs and alcohol as an addict, or are they going to be one of the ones that can easily say no? Because it's easy to say no if you're not seeing that big wow. It's hard to say no when you don't feel normal in the first place, and then you're trying to fill this niche that's already missing. And that's what a lot of parents and also just people don't understand about addictive personalities and why it's so important here. Because if they try it once and they feel great, it's really hard to say no, especially when you're 16 or 17. Okay, the G group stands for glutamine. These are, you often feel anxious for no reason. You sometimes feel free-floating anxiety, like for no reason. You're just driving along and you feel anxious, or you're clenching the steering wheel and nothing just happened. You frequently feel edgy and it's difficult to relax. You often feel a knot in your stomach, kind of like butterflies, but like when you were going to be nervous on a first date or something, that kind of feeling. Falling asleep is sometimes difficult, especially with busy brain. It's hard to turn your mind off when you want to relax, so the mind is like, you occasionally experience feelings of panic for no reason. You often use alcohol or other sedatives to calm down, including wine or alcohol. Insecurity and just general anxiousness. And this would be a person who would most likely also be on some drug as an anti-anxiety medicine, like maybe Paxil or something like that. So the solution for anti-anxiety is a glutamine or a glutamine derivative called GABA. GABA is gamma-amine butyric acid. And GABA Flow is a product I like a lot. It's by Apex again. It's absorbable. It's a liquid with L-theanine, L-taurine, and B6, which helps the body produce your own GABA and glutamine. GABA is just a form of glutamine, and I'm going to tell you when I would use one versus the other in just a second. 500 to 1,000 milligrams twice a day. You wouldn't generally need as much glutamine as L-phenylalanine, or you can go up to 4,000 milligrams twice a day. It can be taken several times a day for ADD, ADHD, or brain fog. It's one of the top solutions for those conditions. You can take amino acids on an empty stomach. You should take them on an empty stomach, so before meals. Don't mistake glutamine for monosodium glutamate, which is MSG. Both can bypass the blood-brain barrier and are similar in chemical structure. So this is the deal, is in the brain, there's brain receptor sites wanting amino acids. And so if you think of it like a lock and key, or like Pac-Man really, and they're up in the brain and they're just waiting for amino acids. But then you don't get the amino acids because you're not eating, let's say, beef and buffalo, which is high in all 22 of the amino acids. And this is especially difficult for vegans. And so here's your little Pac-Man wanting amino acids, and they didn't get them, but what they got was hot Cheetos, which has MSG on there. And so the MSG has the same chemical structure as glutamine, and so it can get to the brain. And there's the receptor sites waiting for that glutamine, and when that glutamate hits that receptor site, because it's the same structure, it gets into the cell, and the cell is like, holy cow, and it literally fires itself to death. We're going to talk later about Alzheimer's, dementia, and those conditions, which is very highly linked. Even MS is linked to MSG and how this lock and key thing works. But once that brain cell starts firing, forget it and trying to concentrate, focus, go to sleep. you know, like Busy Brain or like the Energizer Bunny. I know for myself, I'm very sensitive to MSG, and there's a few restaurants in Houston that, you know, are more like, I know I cannot eat there. One of them is a Mexican restaurant that has really great fajitas, and if I ever eat fajitas there at dinner at 4 a.m., I'm laying in bed going, okay, that was not worth it. I mean, they're really good, not worth it. And sometimes you'll get MSG thrown into something that maybe you weren't looking at or expecting, and you'll know because you're not going to sleep, and your brain is wide awake, even if your body is very physically tired, even if you have to get up early in the morning, like whatever. So what happens a lot is you'll, let's say your evening meal is a packaged, you know, hamburger helper or mac and cheese or something that might have MSG in it, or some seasoning packet mix or pre-marinated fajitas or stuff that you buy at the grocery store that's like pre-prepared, or lean cuisine, or stuff that's in the frozen section, almost all has MSG or some form of MSG in it. The problem is if that's in your evening meal, you're going to have sleep issues, and that's going to come up again later. So it's really important to stop that. And what I see a lot, going back to kids for a second, is they love these hot Cheetos. They love chips and the flavored chips, and you know, they'll go to the bedroom with a bag of chips and their cell phone or their iPad. That is like the worst combination, because their brain is not going to sleep, and they're going to have REM sleep issues, and that's going to turn into other learning disorders we'll talk about more next month. So avoid MSG completely if the G group applies to you, if you're generally kind of an uptight, anxious, worrying person. And it says GABA can be taken before bed to help turn the busy brain off. My suggestion on GABA is this. If you have a hard time falling asleep because of busy brain, and you know who you are if you do, I recommend that you keep GABA with you. And if you eat out, like fast food or at a restaurant, for sure, and then depending on what you're making at home, I mean, even like ranch salad dressing or bottled salad dressings for the most part have MSG in them. So if you know you're going to eat those things, I recommend you avoid them. But let's say you're going to eat them, you want to take the GABA first, because then GABA can get in there and fulfill those receptor sites in the brain, so that when you have the MSG, it's not going to kill your brain cells. Because what we're talking about here is a long-term future of being kind of brain dead and turning into Alzheimer's and dementia. And there's some awesome information online about aspartame and MSG directly related to Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and MS. So if you have a family member with any of those conditions, they've got to clean up their food, which is very, very difficult in an institutional food situation, meaning school lunches, nursing homes, long-term care facilities, hospitals. I mean, do you think it's possible to get non-MSG food there? No, there's no way. So they're not going to get better in that environment. I mean, they're not going to let you bring in 3 meals a day, and you're not going to want to anyway, of homemade food. But that's almost what's necessary if you're dealing with a loved one that's in an institution and trying to get past this little description. Okay, so here's dopamine. And remember, dopamine is very similar to the opiate group, but it's a separate group. D and O are different. Oh, I misspelled dopamine up there. Sorry about that. So it says you lack pleasure in your life. You feel there are no rewards in life. Lacking pleasure in life could feel like you just don't feel happy. It's like mild depression, but maybe you wouldn't call it depression. You have unexplained lack of concern for others, even loved ones, so lack of empathy. You experience decreased parental feelings. Life seems less colorful or flavorful. Things that used to be fun aren't any longer enjoyable. That's also similar to serotonin. You have become a less spiritual or socially concerned person, and indecisiveness. So if you have, 3 or more of that list, you might want to look at supplementing dopamine, especially if you have some in the opiate group. But the funny thing about this is sometimes people will have the D group and not really the O group because the symptoms are different. Sorry, this is flipping out. Okay, I'll change that later. So the dopamine solutions. Chocolate is high in dopamine, but it doesn't mean go run out and eat a lot of chocolate. But it is high in dopamine. That's why people kind of can pass the chocolate bowl, or they're going to eat the chocolate bowl, because it has to do with their dopamine levels. Again, opiate drugs such as cocaine, ecstasy, crack, heroin, others create a dopamine rush, affecting people that have dopamine deficiencies compared to those that don't. Attention span will be reduced with dopamine deficiency, especially with past drug use. Now, this is super important. if you or someone that you know did drugs, especially these opiate drugs, even 20 or 30 years ago, it is going to affect their attention span. So what do you think is happening these days with Adderall, Ritalin, and these drugs? These are definitely opiate drugs. They're amphetamines, actually. So it makes you become dependent on them because of your attention span. And if you've done dopamine products or drugs, like let's say badly, the attention span can be affected for many years later. Supplementation for dopamine is the same as the O or opiate group, and I use D-L-phenylalanine with addict cases. And so you don't have to be an addict to be dopamine deficient, and especially if someone's mild to moderately depressed, I would supplement D-L-phenylalanine along with 5-HTP. G is different in that it's more anxiety and worry. So the next group is the N group. And the N group is norepinephrine, which has to do a lot with adrenal function. So if you are in this group, you suffer from a lack of energy. You often find it difficult to get going, so like in the morning especially. Suffer from decreased drive, and this could be also sex drive. You often start projects and then don't finish them. You frequently feel a need to sleep or hibernate. You feel depressed a good deal of the time. You occasionally feel paranoid. Your survival seems threatened, like you're in fight or flight mode, and you're bored a great deal of the time. I see this a lot with kids too, where they're like, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored. And a lot of times this is the N group or the norepinephrine group. So norepinephrine is a two-step process of the hypothalamus gland. L-phenylalanine is first converted into tyrosine. Tyrosine is then converted into norepinephrine. Try L or D-L-phenylalanine first. Supplementing L-tyrosine when levels are not low can cause headaches. So that's a good tip. If someone has taken just tyrosine because they thought it was good for the thyroid or norepinephrine and it caused headaches, it might be because the tyrosine levels were not actually low. In extreme cases, L-tyrosine may need to be supplemented, especially if the conversion is not happening. And Dopaflow by Apex is liquid absorbable form with L-phenylalanine and L-tyrosine with B6. The reason I keep bringing up some of the products of liquid are a few reasons I want to go over right now. L-phenylalanine and D-L-phenylalanine you can get anywhere. I mean, you can get most Vitamin Shop, Vitamin Cottage, Whole Foods, you know, stuff like that. I have the single amino acids because I do a lot of amino acid therapy with people. But this is the deal, is that those are generally coming in a capsule or a hard tablet. And if someone has digestive issues or the body needs to do this conversion, but it's missing something, they'll not see a difference. And so I do like to put people on liquid forms first to get them kind of back to normal, and that might take a month to 3 months. Then they can try a hard tablet or capsule or pill and see if they can maintain this improvement in their brain and their mood. And if they do, great. But I find that if someone already has digestive issues, especially if they have fast transit issues or Crohn's or diverticulitis or something like that, forget the pills. They're just not going to work, and people are not going to see the difference, and they're going to give up. They're just going to say, oh, that didn't work for me. Okay, and then the last one is the C group, and this is choline, or also there's a form called acetylcholine. So this group has to do with difficulty adapting to change or new situations, poor memory, poor recall of facts. And this one's kind of funny because sometimes I'll read this to people, and they'll be like a husband and wife, and whoever I'm asking will say, no, I don't think so. And they're like, what? You always have some other crazy view of what happened, and it's not even real. And so people can have poor recall of facts and not even actually realize that they have that. Lack of ability to articulate thoughts clearly, lack of logical thinking and reasoning, lack of focus and or concentration, ADD or ADHD, lack of reaction time. One that people tell me on this one might be reaction time to anything, to even physical or emotional, but it's a lot of times they'll say something happened and they couldn't even react right away. They didn't know what to react or how to react, or it was almost like an afterthought. I should have done this, or I should have said that. Learning challenges and mental fog. So choline solutions include acetyl flow liquid spray again with a form of choline that's supposed to be carnitine and B6. It enhances, I put this together last night at like 1 a.m., so sorry for the few mistakes. Enhances neuroplasticity in the physical structure of the brain. There's a few different lectures I've heard, especially Apex's brain chemistry information, which is incredibly awesome. And they talk about plastic changes in the brain, or plastic changes with hormones, especially with people who are doing hormone overload. And so you want the neuroplasticity, because that's where people become inflexible, or where they become so stodgy and fixed in their ideas and they can't change, or they can't even listen. So that's super important with choline. Egg yolks, lecithin, beef liver, and salmon are high in choline naturally. And it says a choline recommendation is 500 milligrams per day. And just to point out, one whole egg, including the egg yolk, which is the part that's high in choline, only has 100 milligrams of choline. You'd have to eat 5 eggs a day to meet the basic standard amount of choline. And choline, as you'll see here in a little bit, is hugely important with kind of manic and bipolar ups and downs and mood. I want to stop right here. Actually, I think I have 1 or 2 more slides. While I get to the next 2 slides, I just want to point out there's a way as a participant that you can send a question through the chat, or you can raise your hand. So if you are looking at your GoToWebinar panel, if you click the little raise your hand sign, it'll raise your hand and I can call on you if you have a question later. And if you want to send a question, you can click on the question tab, type your question in a box that pops up, and also your question. I'll read it out loud and I'll answer your question. So feel free. This is very interactive. I want you to get the most out of tonight, spending your Tuesday night for 2 hours. So if you have a question, please ask it. It's okay if it's your own personal situation or whatever. Okay, so the next thing is some just basic things to know about amino acids, and these are super important because people don't really understand amino acids. Amino acids, the best source is red meat, specifically beef or buffalo, and it's the only meat source that has all the essential amino acids. And when I say essential, I mean 22. So if someone always eats chicken, or always eats soy, or always eats beans, they're not getting all these amino acids, and they're not getting enough in milligrams to make the brain happy and the brain to work right. And so if meat is not in your diet, you have to supplement amino acids. I mean, I'm not telling you to go eat beef and buffalo if it's against your beliefs or religion or whatever, but it is super important to supplement properly so that you don't kind of go down a sinkhole when it has to do with amino acids. Spirulina and blue-green algae are also good vegetarian sources of amino acids, but you have to have it like every day, you know, like 1 or 2 servings a day. Soy and other vegan sources are not good sources of amino acids. In fact, they're terrible. Chicken, fish, eggs, and cheese do not offer all the essential amino acids, so they're going to get partial amino acids. But this is what I see with most Americans, which is probably what's mostly on the call tonight, is that they'll eat the same proteins over and over. Like they'll eat a lot of cheese, or they'll eat turkey, or they'll eat whatever, but there's not a whole lot of variety. And that is also a reason they're not getting all the proper amino acids. The next thing is that most people, especially blood types other than O, do best when taking a digestive enzyme that helps break down fats and proteins when eating meals with proteins and fats. So what that means is, let's say you're a blood type A and you go out and have that nice ribeye for dinner, and you're thinking, oh, I'm getting all my amino acids because I'm having steak. That is not true, because if you have any digestive issues, like you're low in bile, or your liver's bogged down, or your gallbladder's been removed, or like whatever, you're just low in stomach acids, or let's say you take Tums or Rolaids and things that make your stomach acids really low, then you're not going to break down that ribeye. So you could be going and buying super expensive steak at Whole Foods and really nice ribeye and getting nothing out of it if your body's not digesting it properly. So digestive enzymes sometimes is also the magic ticket. One last thing I'll say about digestive enzymes is sometimes I do also recommend them with supplements, because if you take, I mean, some people take a lot of pills. They take 15, 20, well, a lot of people take more than 10, let's say, 15, 20, 25. And sometimes people come in and see me with grocery bags of pills, and those are generally in gelatin capsules. And gelatin is a gelatinous cow fat product. And so your body has to break down those pills, which is still an animal product. And if you're already low in what breaks down fats and proteins, you're not breaking down those gelatin capsules. they're going to go through your body completely undigested. And then the last tip on general amino acids is I recommend a broad amino acid base with all 22 essential amino acids, such as the one I use is Douglas Labs Aminogram. And then supplement your individual amino acids after you have a good base if needed. So this is true of B vitamins as well. You're always supposed to take a B complex and then add specific Bs that you might be low in because they're synergistic. Like some aminos work together, like you've heard tonight already, tyrosine, glutamine, phenylalanine, all work together to make the brain happy. So what happens, like when you go to the grocery store or the health food store, is they'll have like amino acid something, like brain amino acids, and there'll be like 3 amino acids in there. It might be the ones you need, but what about the other ones, cysteine, methionine, lysine? There's a lot of other amino acids that are important for other functions than the brain, which is off topic tonight, but you want to get all 22 of them. And if you're not eating red meat regularly and taking a digestive enzyme regularly, you should start with a base of the 22 essential amino acids and then supplement, maybe do that for a month or 2, and then go back to the questionnaire, see how you feel, and then I would adjust accordingly. Okay, so if you have a question, feel free. I don't see any, so I'm going to keep going. We're going to get right into some of the mood disorders and some tips and some things to know. Now, when I put on here check aminos first, this is on depression. There's several ways that might mean to check that. That might mean check it through hair analysis, or check it through SpectraCell, or check it through muscle testing, or check it through dowsing, or I use New Vision, which is I'm the owner of New Vision, the software technology. So I have I have another way to do it. But you want to, when I say check, I'm talking about verifying, that this is, possibly an issue for you, because, a lot of times with depression, you run into the doctor and they're going to stick you on SSRI, but that may not even be your issue. And that's why they work for some people and don't work, or they work for a little while and then don't work anymore. So if you have depression, I would check your aminos first and go back to the list we just finished, especially the D and O group, or the N group, or the C group. Pretty much any of them except the G group, especially dopamine and serotonin. And if you're not sure, don't have a way to check them, and you're just trying to do this yourself, I would just supplement dopamine and serotonin and just see what happens over like a 30-day amount of time. Check sleep issues. How much REM sleep are you getting? If you are sleeping with a snorer, or dogs that move all the time, or you don't sleep well, many people's depression is just they're not getting good quality sleep. They're not getting enough hours of REM sleep, or they're going to bed too late, or they have busy brain, or they get up to urinate 10 times a night. So all of these issues can also cause depression. Nutritionally, the top, besides whatever I mentioned, the top factors for depression can be niacin, which is B3, biotin, which is also good for skin and hair. If you have bad skin and hair and nails, biotin might be a good thing to try. Pantothenic acid, which is B5, and then B12. All of those B vitamins can cause depression. And so I would also suggest trying a B complex for 1 month. It's amazing how much B complex can do for depression and also sleep if you're deficient in the B vitamins. Also, Bs are water soluble. And so if you urinate a lot, or even if you urinate 3 times, your Bs are gone that you took before breakfast. So they are one of the exceptions to when I tell some people to just say, I can't remember, I can't take things more than once a day. You have to on Bs, because Bs are gone by lunchtime. And if you don't take them, you're only getting the benefit in the morning. Candida can cause depression. There is an at-home test, and this is another, I do want to say that besides Dr. Roger Murphy, some of the information in the rest of the slides is thanks to Hannah Kroger, which I'm teaching her basic 7 physical causes of ill health this weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, in a format similar to this. And the other source of some of this good information is also Apex Energetic Blood Chemistry course. And so I put this together pretty quickly yesterday, but it's from using this information like 15 years with clients. Okay, so your Candida test is to urinate in a bowl and let it sit out covered with saran wrap, and then at night put it in the refrigerator. and the next morning, if there's kind of like a waxy, fatty ring around the outside of the bowl, like if you'd made soup, it's not going to be like fat, like a thick layer of fat. It's going to be more waxy around the bowl. Then you most likely have a candida issue. So this is an easy at-home test. Checking heavy metals, especially mercury, because this can lead to depression. Unless you do dowsing or muscle testing, the best source is hair analysis because of the way heavy metals and minerals work in the body. Also check low thyroid and low adrenal. Now, we talked about these a lot last month in the hormone talk, but basically taking your oral temperature, AM and PM, will let you know if you have low thyroid or low adrenals. And if it's under 98.0, then that might be the reason that you have depression. Avoid sodium fluoride completely. This is a Hannah Kroger tip. She said that sodium fluoride not only can dull the senses and suppress our intuition and suppress our pineal gland, which, by the way, has to do with that conversion having to do with sleep, but it can also cause depression. So I would avoid sodium fluoride is bad. It's a waste product, where calcium fluoride is the natural source of fluoride, which made fluoride popular. But that's not what we're getting in toothpaste. That's not what's in the water supply. So you should use fluoride filters and avoid tap water and fluoride in toothpaste and mouth rinses. And the dentist, don't avoid the dentist. Avoid the fluoride at the dentist. And then situational. So in depression, you know, sometimes it's situational. And I mean, yeah, someone can take antidepressants for a short time, like if they've lost a loved one or someone like that. But, you know, usually I would try to work on that in some other way versus taking antidepressant. I personally think antidepressants are very dangerous. And so they can sometimes exacerbate the condition of depression and lead to suicidal thoughts and tendencies as well. So if there's a situation, sometimes it means changing the situation, like let's say it's a marriage or going through a divorce or, you know, something going on with your kids or stepkids. You know, sometimes that doesn't just go away on its own, and that can be the cause of depression. Now, these other things might help too, but that's one of those things that you have to just like identify and realize if it's some situation at home or work that's underlying cause of depression. I personally think it has to be addressed because it can cause some pretty serious long-term health issues in physical symptoms. And hopefully this year we'll get to just emotional stuff. I am teaching a class on that, a live class in Houston in October, so it's a way to really super duper evaluate yourself and get to the root cause of some things. Okay, so on anxiety, we talked about anxiety a little bit, having to do with glutamine and GABA. I want to talk about it again, having to do with other possible causes, because glutamine and GABA deficiency is not the only reason someone can have anxiety. So first of all, they can have, you know, that, check that first. That's very common. But the second thing is you can check the adrenals through an ASI hormone panel called an adrenal stress index test. And if someone has hyperadrenals, then they're more likely to have anxiety. So they can wake up with anxiety in the middle of the night. The way the adrenals are supposed to work is they're supposed to be optimal in the morning and tapered down throughout the day. But if someone is very super stressed out about work, money, family, husband, wife, whatever, someone's health issue, being a caretaker, then the adrenals can have a direct effect of anxiety. And I would recommend also adrenal support. Check the thyroid, again, the oral body temperature, because low thyroid can cause anxiety. And then the autonomic nervous system, this could be like a whole 2-hour talk, but are you in fight or flight for some reason? Are you feeling like, are you very jumpy? Are you always just waiting for something to go wrong? Are you worrying all the time about stuff that you can't do anything about, like the weather or what someone else is going to do? You can't do anything about those things, but sometimes those go back also to emotional issues where someone felt threatened, maybe because of a situation like PTSD, maybe because of abuse, maybe because of a car accident. But if someone's left in fight or flight, this is very bad long term, because what happens is, like, I was in a really bad car accident when I was 16, and I know that that was one of my issues having to do with being autoimmune later in my 20s, because my body was still in fight or flight, basically survival mode, but you don't know you're in it until someone tells you. I mean, then, yeah, it makes sense. But, you know, these are some of the common things with the autonomic nervous system is if you were really, like, scared for your life, or you were worried that, you know, someone's going to smash into you at an intersection, there's some definite physiological things that go wrong. One is busy brain. One is kind of always anticipating something, or nervous, or kind of OCD stuff. Another one is heart rate, because when you're running for your life, your heart rate is up, so that could be the reason behind that. Also, poor digestion. You know, generally when someone's running for their life, they're not saying, hey, stop, let me have a meal and digest it really well. Sleep is affected because you're not saying, hey, wild animal, let me take a good 8-hour siesta, follow me in the morning. You know, so you can imagine that if the body's stuck in fight or flight, then not only is it going to cause anxiety, but it's going to cause a whole lot of issues. And if people think about that, like in their own life and realistically, they can even go back to a point in time and usually figure out when that started, like when did they start feeling like that. Sometimes it's since they were very young, you know, and small children. Blood sugar can cause anxiety, and it's a super simple thing to try. You can try chromium for 1 month. Chromium is very inexpensive. It's about $6 to $8 a bottle. And if you take one before meals and then your anxiety goes down, it usually is a sign of hyperglycemia, which is high blood sugar. So a lot of times people that are insulin resistant or diabetics or leaning that direction will be more likely to have anxiety. Again, check heavy metals, because lead and mercury in particular can lead to anxiety or hyperactivity. And again, this goes back to testing in a hair analysis. And then check chemical residues or do a chemical detox just to be sure. And we talked about this, again, a lot in January with a list of very likely exposures that we all get chemical residues just from being American or just from living on this planet. It's a toxic world, and we're all bombarded. It's in our foods, it's in our drinks, it's in our air, it's in the exhaust, it's, you know, just literally everywhere. And so I don't think there's very many places left in the world that that's not true. And so, especially in the U.S., you know, with fracking and all this other stuff, chemtrails, so sometimes anxiety can be that. And what I didn't put on here, which should definitely be on here, but it's already in the glutamine group, is that MSG and aspartame. If you are dealing with anxiety, and anxiety is kind of like busy brain and worry, you should eliminate MSG and aspartame completely, like 100% none, because it could be your underlying cause. And it's, I mean, it's hard to give it up at first, but then once you feel normal, it's easy to give it up, because it's like, oh, wow, I didn't know that that was affecting me like that. Okay, now I want to talk about bipolar and manic disorders. So definitely you want to check amino acids, because the amino acids can have to do with these tendencies, especially acetylcholine. So acetylcholine can have to do with these ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. And I would automatically try supplementing dopamine, acetylcholine, and serotonin, and start with the low doses and build slowly based on the instructions at the beginning of tonight's webinar, and then see what the magic formula is, because it's really just kind of, everyone's different. You can't tell everyone they're going to take 100 milligrams of each one twice a day and they're going to feel great, because it's not true. They might need 800 milligrams of dopamine, 400 of serotonin, and 200 of, or 500 of acetylcholine. They might need maximum levels to get back to steady, and then they can start backing off and see what dose keeps them feeling okay. I would also check adrenal functions, and I would do that using the ASI Adrenal Stress Index Panel. Highs and lows can mimic adrenal dysregulation and can be undiagnosed adrenal issues. I actually had a case where a person was medicated on for being bipolar for many years, like over 20 years, and she was on some pretty heavy-duty drugs. But even though she was on the drugs, her highs were where she wouldn't sleep for like 14 days, and she would have all the lights on in the house and noise going, and she was kind of unbearable. And then the lows would be a month or two where she wanted to be in darkness and just really couldn't even get out of bed. And, you know, I kept seeing adrenal, and I was like, wow, and nothing amino acid, which was weird. and she was clinically diagnosed as bipolar. And anyway, the family did some additional testing, and it turns out that she did have adrenal issues. And the adrenal was mimicking, because adrenals is also that rush. It's that epinephrine. It's that going into the reserve. Sometimes it's even that superhuman strength to take a car off of a small child. You know, that's the adrenal rush. But then there's that, you know, people know what endorphins are, what you get from working out. And then there's the low, like where the body's exhausted. So it did the rush. It produced what it needed to stay up for 14 days and not sleep. But then it crashes. And so it goes to basically the polar opposite. But what happens with bipolar and manic is the episodes generally become more severe in longer periods of time without proper supplementation. It can be turned around. Zinc deficiency is linked, so I would definitely try taking zinc. There's very few foods high in zinc naturally, like oysters, sunflower seeds, and paprika. Not many people eat those regularly, and I don't think. I love the Hungarian smoked paprika. I like to put it on everything. But a lot of people don't do that, so you might want to check zinc levels. This would also be through heavy metals. And then heavy metal toxicity. So a heavy metal hair analysis checks minerals, because minerals are metals, and heavy metals. But heavy metals are the bad guys, like cadmium, aluminum, lead, mercury, and stuff like that. And many times with bipolar manic disorder, there is a heavy metal toxicity. Could be from copper pipes, could be from vaccine, thimerosal, could be from dental work, could be from some other source in the environment where the metals came from, but they're always going to be bad news in the case of bipolar and manic. There's some pretty good information out there too on this from Hal Huggins. I think it's in his MS book where he talks about mood disorders and dental work. I think he mentions it on all his books, but I think in the MS book he talks about it specifically. So you definitely want to do a heavy metals test, because just medicating bipolar and manic is never fixing the problem. So you're going to be living with this problem over and over and over, and those drugs don't really work. And most of the people that take those drugs don't like how they feel on the drugs. They don't feel like themselves. They feel very medicated. It's kind of like taking an ADD medication where they feel kind of disassociated, or they lose their personality. The same thing happens with bipolar and manic disorder. Okay, on schizophrenia, schizophrenia to me is very interesting because it can be just simple serotonin deficiency, and you would use the 5-HTP to help support serotonin if that's the case, and you would follow the model we talked about in the very beginning. But there's another side that can cause schizophrenia, which is dopamine excess, and this is something that a lot of people don't know or don't really talk about too much, but this can be caused by how the body processes dopamine, but also influenced by dopamine-enhancing habits such as alcohol, drugs, and chocolate. Dopamine excess can also be an underlying cause of Tourette syndrome and involuntary movements like Parkinson's, like tremors, also hyperactivity. So if someone, let's say, another one that is on this list is smoking. Cigarettes and tobacco definitely can cause dopamine excess. And sometimes, schizophrenia is not just like what you think of in the movies, like Carrie. I remember that was popular when I was in high school, and it's scary. But sometimes it's personality changes, or sometimes it's like you feel like you're dealing with two people, but they're not really changing full personality. It's not like one day they're a girl and one day they're a boy. It's like you don't know what you're going to wake up to. You don't know what the personality is going to be, which you could also say a little bit about manic and bipolar, but schizophrenia can be kind of very unique. And a lot of times people are not clinically diagnosed with schizophrenia or the other type of schizotypal because they're not changing full personalities, but their personality is definitely affected. Sometimes there's other things that's not on the list, but sometimes there's like lack of remorse. Sometimes they're very narcissistic. So schizophrenia can be someone who has done or does a lot of alcohol, drugs, smokes a lot, eats a lot of chocolate, stuff like that. Too much can cause, this particular mood disorder. And I would suggest, if you are suspecting that could be someone look up schizophrenia on the internet, because it's a lot different than what most people suspect. And especially if you're, having the mood changes of Alzheimer's and the personality changes, and then you got Parkinson's thrown in there, definitely you want to check dopamine excess and get all dopamine products out of their life. You don't want them having any alcohol, drugs meaning street drugs, chocolate, and no tobacco. Those are the big four. I just forgot to put tobacco on here. And then emotional conflicts due to abuse, escapism, avoidance, or past situations with extreme stress like PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder can definitely be associated with schizophrenia. And so, let's say someone was raped or someone was in a war like the Desert Storm or Vietnam War. Sometimes schizophrenia is a true split personality because that's their coping strategy. This is the way that they cope with life. This is the way they cope with what's happened to them. This is the way that they don't remember. So sometimes you can have, again, this dual personality or split personality, but sometimes it can be like a 20-year-old that doesn't really remember their childhood. Like they can't remember anything. And you start asking them questions and they're like, I don't remember, I don't remember. They can't remember like any details. That is also a form of schizophrenia because it's not that they really have bad memory. It's that the memory has shut down the past or the memories as a protection mechanism. So when people tell me things like that, like they don't remember their childhood or they were in some very high stress situation, a lot of people think of PTSD as like rape and war, and it's not just that either. It could be a car wreck. It could be losing a child in a car accident. It could be something they saw, like some horrible thing that they witnessed, like someone else getting shot. And so it doesn't even have to be a personal situation. I've met a few PTSD people that actually witnessed things on TV that caused the PTSD, like some really bad graphic stuff that no one should watch. And so if you're really sensitive or empathic, those things can really do some damage, and I would try to avoid that too, just to protect yourself. I want to kind of open it up again, for questions. Let me see what the next subject here is, sleep. I want to get off, before we get off of the aminos and mood disorders, I just want to check in and see if you have specific questions that I can answer. I'm going to give you just like 2 minutes that you can either raise your hand or put a question in the chat box. And it can be, like I said, on anything that we've covered so far. So if you have something that you want to know more about or a personal situation, feel free to ask me. I'm going to take a drink here while you guys might have a question. Okay, you guys are hanging in there. All right. So let's go to the next slide. If a question comes up, I'll definitely answer it. Okay, sleep is a huge subject. Again, this could be just 2 hours, so I'm going to hit really the highlights on, what I think about sleep and what I see the most. Sleep is so important that if you're not getting sleep, it's almost like a cat chasing its tail with adrenal dysregulation. If you are not getting sleep, your adrenals are never going to get restored, and you're not going to get out of adrenal dysfunction or dysregulation. And a lot of times what people will say is, well, how long do I need to take adrenal support? How long do I need to take thyroid support? How long do I need to do whatever? I can promise you, if you're not sleeping and getting the proper amount of REM sleep, it's going to be hard to get off of adrenal and thyroid support especially, but even some of the other support items, because if you don't get that REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement or dream state, if you're a very light sleeper, or if you don't really ever go to sleep well, or you don't wake up refreshed in the morning, stuff like that, then I would definitely pay attention to this list, because I really think this is like the key. Well, it's not the only key, because amino acids are super important, but it is really super important on how you feel. And we already talked about, like, if you have any depression issues or have family members with depression issues and they're not sleeping, it's going to be hard to fix that depression, even with the right nutrition, even with the right amino acids. The most common possible nutritional deficiencies are iron, calcium, tryptophan, biotin, selenium, and valine. Now, I didn't make slides for all of these because if I did that, this would be much longer. But I do want to read out of some of these neglect symptoms. And what I want you to do on this part, because sleep is so important, I want you to kind of count on your fingers or on your notepad and write down how many of these symptoms you have. Because if you have, like, let's say more than 5, this might be not only a reason you're not sleeping, but it might be a reason you're having some of these other symptoms. So when I read these indications, these are indications of generally of these mineral deficiencies in biotin and selenium. So I'm going to start with iron. So the common iron deficiency symptoms are getting fatigued easily or getting tired, feeling more emotional or crying more easily. And this could be out of a commercial or over something you heard on the radio. Dizziness, difficulty or labored breathing, and this could be compared to before. Like this could be you're just kind of walking or going up some stairs. Well, you know, that's going to affect everyone to some degree, breathing, but I'm talking about really, you're really labored, you know, you're really having a problem with that. Dull hearing, and that can be a hearing that comes and goes. Like sometimes you can hear okay, and then sometimes you're asking like what a lot. Fault-finding tendency, and this is like finding fault with other people, like feeling critical. Flat fingernails instead of being smooth and kind of rounded. A fissured tongue, which means like cracks on the side of your tongue. Like if you look at your tongue in the mirror, it's not nice and smooth and pink. It's kind of like has cracks in it or on the sides. Mentally hard to please, and this can be mentally harder to please than maybe you used to be. Like someone can say, hey, do you want to get you some chips? No, I don't want any. Or someone will do something, trying to do something for you, and it's like, no, it's like you're just not happy, you know? That can be iron too. Any pains in the head, the heels, the soles of the feet, the fingertips, and the shoulders can all be iron deficiency. Now, a lot of times when I read that out to my clients, they'll say, oh, yeah, but I have this shoulder issue. Well, just consider your shoulder issue could be that you've had long-term iron deficiency. Again, iron is not in anything that you would possibly be eating except beef, buffalo, some in spinach, but you'd have to eat a lot of spinach, and in calf liver or beef liver, and in blackstrap, unpasteurized molasses. I mean, those are really the only real sources of iron. And if you're a menstruating woman, you need more iron than men, for sure. Okay, there's more to the list, though. Poor equilibrium, this could be like if you stand up and feel kind of woozy or wobbly, or you're just walking around long and you don't feel stable. Sleepless at night, just for like really you don't even have busy brain. You're just not sleeping well, but then you're sleepy in the daytime. Also, low oxygen levels, which can cause altitude issues. Like if you don't feel well at high altitude, like if you go to Colorado and you are very fatigued, or you have had altitude sickness, brain fog, poor short-term memory, cold hands, and cold feet. So that's the iron list. So if you have more than 5 of those, you might consider how much iron you're getting in your normal diet and supplement iron accordingly. For iron, I use a bovine liver iron if you're blood type O, and I use Dr. Christopher's herbal iron if you're other than O. So if you're A, B, or AB. Okay, the next list is calcium. So calcium, a lot of people just think of strong bones, but calcium is so important in other ways. If you're calcium deficient, it's easier to gain weight. And there's brooding, which is kind of like sulking, lack of willpower, or that can be lack of kind of drive or ambition, lack of courage, listlessness, kind of wanting to just sit around, not really having that motivation, any kind of nervous conditions, also anxiety. Toe and leg cramps, this can be like Charlie horses or toe and leg cramps people generally get at night. Sighing, like when people go, and, you know, some people do that a lot, you know, and they don't even realize they're doing it. Soft bones or osteopenia, osteoporosis diagnosis, PMS issues, sores or bruises that take a long time to heal, a sour odor, and sometimes you'll smell this on your clothes, like you've worn like a t-shirt all day and you take it off and it has like a sour smell and you think it's the laundry. It could be you. That would be calcium. Sleeplessness, again, Excess salivation, this is like having too much spit in your mouth. And some people, like, especially men more than women, but spit a lot, and that's usually a sign that they're calcium deficient. Petty complaining, cyst formation, and this can be bony cyst, breast cyst, uterine cyst, thyroid cyst. Any of those cysts are a sign of calcium deficiency. Difficulty thinking, like concentrating, afternoon headaches, heart cramps or heart palpitations, especially at night, and bone deformities like an osteoarthritis. Also, calcium has to do with proper blood clotting, so if you have known blood clotting issues, it also has to do with irregular heartbeat, irregular hormones or hormone imbalances. So you can see that it's huge. It has a lot to do with a whole lot of things. One thing about calcium is that carbonated drinks rob the body of calcium. It's almost impossible to get proper calcium levels if you drink carbonated drinks like Coke. And lead or lead exposure displaces calcium. So that could be a reason that you could have that. Okay, tryptophan I'm not going to read out of this book because we've already kind of covered that anyway. I'm going to go to biotin. I'm currently taking biotin myself right now, and it has done, like, I wasn't taking it for this, but it has made my nails, like, super strong. Okay, so if you're deficient in biotin, biotin deficiency can cause anemia, dry skin, hair loss, insomnia, poor appetite, not feeling nauseous, like for no real reason, mental depression, muscle weakness or muscle problems, like in muscle formation. Like if, let's say you're active, but you got the saggy thing going on, that could be biotin. And it has to do with fatty acid production and metabolism of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, which is basically digestion. And it helps regulate blood sugar. So if you have blood sugar issues, it could be just biotin. So biotin is not one that people hear about too much unless they're thinking about skin and hair and nails, but it's huge, especially with sleep. Okay, selenium is a mineral that I see commonly deficient. So if you're deficient in selenium, some of the symptoms would be premature aging, infertility issues, like if you were trying to have babies and couldn't, it could just be selenium deficiency. A lowered IQ, this could definitely be as an adult or a child. Heart disease, usually as an adult. Tumors of any kind can happen because of selenium deficiency. So cancer cases, for sure, you want to look at selenium. It says selenium is the new trace mineral that's known to fight infection, detoxify common pollutants. It's a natural antioxidant, and it helps preserve tissue elasticity. So you know some people have like chicken skin, or they have like the hangy skin, or they'll say, oh, I work out or I exercise and I still got the flab. That's usually a selenium thing. Selenium is good for any skin issues, vision, promotes deep sleep, and may also help with cancer. Selenium and vitamin E are synergistic and should be taken together. And I think that garlic's high in selenium. I just wanted to say that. Also, selenium and garlic are antidotes to mercury poisoning. So if you know you have the old amalgam fillings in your mouth, then selenium is a good solution, at least temporarily until you can get those out. Okay, and then the last thing is valine. Now, valine is an amino acid. Let me see if I have something good to read on that one. Valine is not in what I'd call the brain amino acids, but it's still an important amino acid, like out of the essential amino acids. So valine deficiency indications would be easy mental and emotional upsets. Like, you know, people, including adults, have like get upset easily, you know, they're on a short fuse, or let's say kind of have temper tantrums. Nervousness resulting in insomnia, and, you know, like where their busy brain is affecting the sleep, or the list of what they have to do tomorrow, or what they forgot to do today, all that stuff, you could think of valine. It says it's an essential amino acid and needed for cell deterioration, which is really, again, part of the aging process. It has to do with muscle metabolism, tissue repair, and proper nitrogen balance, and that can be huge for heart health, cardiovascular health. So if you have any like cardiovascular issues, or maybe on a sleep apnea machine or something like that, you can also think of baleen. So those are all super important. Either just try, you can't really overdose on those. The body will use what they need to use. And if you're, I don't have even all these individually. I do have them all actually except baleen. But you can find them in stores and just take the recommended dose. Another thing that can affect sleep is emotional conflicts. So if someone has, I'll tell you a very interesting sleep story that I heard that was pretty crazy. And this is like going back to the emotional issues having to do with sleep. I have a client who on the first 2 times I saw her, she never told me she was afraid to go to sleep. She told me that she couldn't sleep. She never could sleep well. She was challenged with sleep, you know, words like that. It wasn't until the 3rd appointment that she used the word, I'm afraid to go to sleep. Now, being afraid to go to sleep is totally different than just having sleeplessness or insomnia or waking up a lot. So I used that information on the New Vision scan to ask, you know, what this had to do with. And all the words that came up on her were like first trimester, second trimester, the birthing experience, water imbalance, and I thought, wow, that sounds like pregnancy or birth. And I didn't know this about her. All I knew was she had a cute little boy now. And what had happened to my client was the first time she got pregnant, she had a miscarriage, and it was in the middle of the night, like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And she had a miscarriage, and it wasn't like her water broke or anything. It was like a kind of early first trimester miscarriage. I'm going from memory on this, but that's what I remember. And then she got pregnant again. And the second baby, the water broke, and she lost the baby, and it was past, and this was also 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was past the second trimester, and the baby did not make it. So then she gets pregnant with her 3rd child, which is the boy she had, and he went fine, except she was bedridden, and they had literally stitched her female things together so she couldn't accidentally have, you know, abort him or have a miscarriage. And she literally couldn't move. She could get out of bed like, you know, 5 minutes a few times a day, and it was very traumatic. And interestingly enough, this 3rd child was born in the middle of the night. I mean, that's when they ran to the hospital. So she had 3 very traumatic and emotional experiences, all between 2 and 4 a.m. And here she's telling me she's afraid to go to sleep. Well, I've had many stories like that I could share. I'm not going to go into all of them, but sometimes someone will have, like one client, I remember their house burned down, and everybody was in bed. It was nighttime. Well, when you have an emotional conflict that was like between, let's say, 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., and all you're thinking about, you're not really thinking about it, it's really becomes a subconscious trigger. But there's some part of that, but going back to fight or flight, there's some part of that fight or flight response that's like, oh no, I can't go to sleep because if I do, something bad's going to happen. Or if I go to sleep, I'm going to lose my baby. Or if I go to sleep, the house is going to burn down. And this is more common than you think. And I remember when my dad was very sick that, you know, this is something I commonly hear from people, but, you know, you'll hear people say, oh, I slept with one ear open, or I slept with one eye open, because they're having to take care of someone, like a special needs child, or a sick spouse, or a mother or father. And this definitely can, so let's say the mother or father actually passes away, and 10 years later, it's like their body forgot that that is over. You know, their body is still half awake, making sure something doesn't go wrong on their watch. And sometimes this goes back to the emotional conflicts that have to be identified, because if it's a trigger like that, these other nutritional products are not really going to help. I mean, they might help a little bit, but my experience is those triggers have to be identified and worked out. The next thing is busy brain. If busy brain is the reason you're not sleeping, you would go back to the tryptophan and glutamine or GABA. I was going to mention something on GABA that I just remembered. Well, I mentioned it about taking it with you, but the difference to me between glutamine and GABA, as far as how I would use them like therapeutically, is glutamine is like a twice-a-day thing that I would take if you're dealing with anxiety and worry and stuff like that. GABA is more of a quick release thing I would take if I know that I'm going to eat MSG or aspartame. And I can't avoid it. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm at a wedding and that they're serving who knows what, then that's when I would take GABA. I was going to mention that a while ago. So glutamine to me is kind of the day-to-day thing. GABA would be the thing I would keep in my purse for those occasions where I might have aspartame and MSG. Okay, next reason for sleep issues is hormone imbalance. And hormone imbalance can be, just the perimenopause, menopause, night sweats, hot flashes, stuff like that. So if you're, a female, especially more than men, but it can happen in men too, but if you're a woman over 40 and let's say 40 to 55 and you used to sleep like a rock and now you're not, it could very easily be your hormones changing. Another common cause of poor sleep is poor circulation or arterial congestion. We talked about this somewhat in January, but I want to let you know that this is a big category. And if you have low blood oxygen, which is the next one, which could be because of low iron or sleep apnea or restricted airways, like you have unresolved sinus issues or unresolved allergy issues, that's going to cause poor circulation. It can cause arterial congestion, and that is a big underlying cause for sleep issues. So I'm going to read just arterial congestion symptoms. I've covered this in January, but I know all of you weren't on that call, and it's so important on sleep because of sleep apnea and not getting proper oxygen to the brain. And then I'll check in because I see that someone has asked a question now. So I'm going to go to arterial congestion. So again, on your notepad, just make tally marks on this list if you have more than 5 of these symptoms, because these are Hannah Kroger's list of common arterial challenges. So if you wake up with morning pain in the middle of the sternum, that's the first symptom. Shoulder pain in general, tightness in the chest, high blood pressure, asthma or the labored breathing, diabetes, hair in the ears. Now, a lot of guys think hair in the ears is natural, and there's only 2 reasons. Not every guy gets hair in the ears, and some women do too. There's 2 main reasons you get hair in your ears. One is arterial congestion, and especially if there's male pattern baldness along with it, or candida. Those are your 2 big reasons that you would have hair in the ears. Sorry, I needed a drink. Okay, the next thing is swollen ankles. This can happen also with flying, if your ankles swell when you're flying. I mean, it could be edema from kidneys, but it also can be arterial. If you can see little purple veins in your nose or on your ankles, or also varicose veins, is a sign of arterial congestion. That's an obvious sign. Forgetfulness, tired after meals, especially heavy meals, a persistent feeling of weakness. Like if you feel like you should be stronger, but you always feel like weak as far as carrying and lifting and moving things around. Coldness, and this can be coldness anywhere, hands, feet, any legs, whatever. Tingling or burning in the toes or feet, which would include neuropathy. Pain in the calves of the legs that improve after resting. So if you have calf pain, it's most likely arterial congestion. Sleeplessness, that's why it's on this list. Sores or bruises on the ankle or feet, or those little veins. If you look at your ankles and they're not pretty, you might think about arterial congestion. Blurred or darkened vision, and this can come and go. Like let's say you wake up in the morning and your vision's very blurry, and then it gets better throughout the day, or vice versa. You wake up and it's fine, but it gets blurry later in the day. Or your glasses are just not right, like your glasses are based on a prescription and then that keeps changing. Noises in the head, and that can be cracking, popping, whizzing, ringing, chirping, any of those things. Dizziness in general. Sudden spells of change of hearing, like deafness. You or your partner ask people to repeat themselves a lot. You need TV really loud, those kind of signs. Right shoulder pain can indicate problems with the first chamber of the heart. Pains down the left arm to the little finger. That's a classic sign of heart issues and arterial congestion. Sliding or shuffling footsteps, like you'd most likely trip more often. That's another sign. A crease in the earlobe is a sure sign, and you can look at your earlobes in the mirror later, and if you have a crease that looks like a fold, that's an arterial congestion, and if both of them are like that, you just have a higher percentage chance of arterial congestion. A crease in the nose, some people have that, looks like a wrinkle in the nose. Any troubles with the lymph, liver, gallbladder, kidneys, or prostate, all of those are also signs of arterial congestion. So all of those are super important. And if you didn't make the January class and those are showing up, and especially if you have more than 5, I would definitely do Hannah's CircuFlow with aloe vera, which is her arterial chelation cleanse. And for low oxygen levels, I would recommend something either like iron or chloroxygen. Chloroxygen is an Herbs Etc. product. It's basically nettles. It is really good if you have allergies, but it's also good just for forcing more oxygen into the bloodstream. It will help things like sleep apnea and things like that. But if you have sleep apnea, you should really use a CPAP machine, because sleep apnea can actually be very dangerous long-term and very bad for arterial congestion. Okay, let me go to the questions. Let me back up one, and then we're going to cover Alzheimer's and dementia. Guy is asking, do cell salts help with calcium deficiency? And yes, they definitely do. So you can use like CalSulf or CalPhos, and those are really good too if people are having absorption issues. So cell salts are a great solution because they don't have to go through the digestive process. So that's a great question, and I didn't remember to put them on the slide, so I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so the next thing is Alzheimer's and dementia related to nutrition. This is a big topic, and anyone that's dealt with a family member with Alzheimer's or dementia knows how sad it is and unfortunate, but it's really correctable, and it's not correctable if they're in an institution, really, because of the diet and the foods there. But there's a place in Houston I heard about not too long ago. It's in Richmond, that is like a housing community that is Alzheimer's people who the families could not care for anymore. And I guess there's kind of like one non-Alzheimer's person in each house, and these houses have like 6 bedrooms. It's kind of like a assisted living kind of setup, I believe. And I was talking to someone that has, some connection over there, and I was pretty impressed that they told me that coconut oil is part of their daily diet, and you'll see in a second what coconut oil can do. I heard about coconut oil and Alzheimer's back at a Peaceful Meadow Retreat at least 15 years ago, and I'll show you a picture of how incredible coconut oil can be. But it's a short-chain fatty acid that has remarkable effect on the brain and how the brain processes information. So that's the first one on the list because that's been well documented. Lecithin is another nutrient. Lecithin, usually the sources of lecithin are soy lecithin or sunflower lecithin. But lecithin is really good at not only Alzheimer's and dementia, but also MS, because it has to do with repairing the myelin sheath. It also has to do with aging and how the brain ages. And so lecithin used to be really popular, like in the the hippie days, 70s and 60s, and people would do like wheat germ and lecithin powder, and it kind of got overlooked because not a lot of people talk about lecithin now. I'm going to read some of the aspects of lecithin because lecithin helps with high cholesterol, unexplained fatigue, heart fatigue, adrenal exhaustion, nerve disorders, which would include Parkinson's, aging, and brain and spinal disorders, which would include MS. And it says the human brain contains 28% lecithin, and the spinal cord has not less than 25%. Every nerve is surrounded by a sheath, which is the myelin sheath, which also contains 25% lecithin. And there's really very few things, this and maybe choline, that are neuroprotective. So lecithin, I mean, I would do every one of these. If I thought I was heading down the Alzheimer's path, I would do every one of these because what have you got to lose? But coconut oil and lecithin are probably by far the 2 you have to have. I mean, you just got to do them. Amino acids, super important for all the reasons we've talked about tonight, but Alzheimer's and dementia especially. Essential fatty acids, there's a ton of research about fish oil and Alzheimer's and dementia cases. Nordic Naturals does a lot of independent research at a lot of expense, and they have some really good articles about Alzheimer's and dementia with supplementing fish oil. And I think one of the research articles I read said that you have to take 5,000 milligrams a day. I would take it with a digestive enzyme because of people's ability to break down fats, but it can be remarkable for inflammation and brain health, and even you know, for young people who are dealing with you know, learning disorders and stuff like that. Alzheimer's and dementia emotionally can be, I'm going to tell you related to hearing, because this might rub some people the wrong way that have some family member with Alzheimer's. But if you imagine this, like if you think about hearing loss related to selective hearing, and let's say a guy, you know, has a wife who's nagging him all the time, always on his case, always critical, always upset with him, you know, he starts tuning her out, right? Well, over a long period of time, that selective hearing tuning out becomes real hearing issues, real hearing loss, where someone needs a hearing aid. So in the same way, Alzheimer's or dementia can be when someone's had a past emotional trauma, something they wish they could forget or want to forget or can't forget, and it's the way the body is like coping. It's a coping mechanism. So that needs to be identified and resolved if that's one of the reasons. MSG and aspartame have way direct links to Alzheimer's and dementia. In a second, I'll show a resource. If you have someone that has Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, or ADHD, you have to get the book Excitotoxins by Dr. Richard Blaylock, because he spells out very specifically how dangerous MSG and aspartame are, especially to brain health. And if someone is having a brain neurological disorder, you have to not have them completely. I'll give you some examples of how, if you've dealt with Alzheimer's or dementia, how you're going to know this is true. Let's say you have a husband and wife together, and let's say the wife cooked all the meals from scratch, and they're old school, and they've been married 50 years, you know, and then let's say she passes, and then, you know, in a few years, the man ends up in a nursing home or institution, and then they decline very rapidly, like they mentally decline. Yeah, you could say it's mood and environment. They don't want to be there maybe, but a lot of times it's the food. It's what they're getting and not getting compared to the home-cooked meals and stuff that they would be getting, you know, if their wife was cooking or their daughter was cooking or whoever. The other example is kids that eat school lunches versus taking their lunch with, you know, whole foods in the lunch. If you've ever been to a school lunch program, it pretty much sucks. It has no nutritional value. And if you have a kid that's given a choice between greasy pepperoni pizza and chocolate cake versus, you know, spinach and broiled chicken breast, how many of them do you think take the chicken? I can tell you, because I've been with the school lunches. Most kids take, 95% take the junk food version of the school lunch option, and 5% might take the healthy option. Maybe it's because they have to have gluten-free or something, but it's a big difference. On Alzheimer's and dementia, they have to have the basic vitamins and minerals. My favorite product on that is Drucker Labs Intramax. It's liquid, it's easily absorbable. I mean, I do have something that's against one a day, but I would not go to the grocery store and get like one a day and think that's going to give you what your body needs. There's a whole lot of reasons why that's true, but you want to have a good basic foundation of nutrition and vitamins and minerals, and that's all of them. Vitamin A, C, B's, D, E, K. They can't just not have a good diet and then not supplement either, because we're talking about the brain health and we're talking about brain deterioration. And then choline, I put a little extra information on choline because this is pretty interesting if you ask me. The exact reason is unclear, but it's thought that over a lifetime, neural pathways become more rigid and less able to form new connections. For this reason, choline may serve as a kind of lubricant for easier synaptic connections, improving memory for patients who suffer from Alzheimer's. Well, remember earlier we talked about choline and the ability to accept change and the ability to be flexible, like mentally flexible. It's kind of the same way. It's like getting away from rigidity and these plastic, semi-permanent changes in the brain Because if you want to heal the brain, you don't want it to be rigid and plasticized. You want it to be flexible and fluid and more malleable. And so that's, one thing why choline can be super important. There's a picture here, and this is from a case. This is what I saw 15 years ago about coconut oil. And so on the first picture, this elderly man with Alzheimer's was asked to draw a clock. And that, you see what he drew on the left-hand side. It's like, well, there's no way you'd even know that's a clock. There's no chance. Then they supplemented him with coconut oil, liquid form coconut oil, for 14 days. And then they asked him to draw a clock. Same guy, and he thought he drew a clock on the first picture, but that's how his brain was working. On the second picture, that's what he drew. And so hard to tell it's a clock, but if you really look, the numbers are basically there and the lines are there. It looks a lot better. And then after 37 days, you see the clock. And it's definitely better than, you want to see it, Morgan? Morgan's here, and I just wanted to be able to see this because it really is pretty fascinating. This is like the first one, no coconut oil, and this is the same guy. Yeah, so this is doing no other vitamins, no other products. This is just on coconut oil. And so this is why when I found out about that housing group in Richmond, Texas, that I realized, wow, they're on to something, and it's so simple. I mean, coconut oil is pretty inexpensive, easy to buy at the store. I would get an organic, good brand of it because it's not that expensive, and you can buy big tubs of it. So the texture, unless it's liquid, is like shortening, but it can be easily added to a lot of things. Okay, before we get to EFAs, let me just leave these pictures up here, and let me see, because there's another question that came up. Oh, sorry. A good dose of coconut oil for Alzheimer's, I think on this study they did 1 tablespoon 4 times a day, like a heaping tablespoon of coconut 4 times a day. I would personally take a digestive enzyme with it because coconut oil is basically a pure fat. It's a short-chain fatty acid, but I mean, it's pretty outstanding. And there's a lot of information online. If you want to know specific milligrams, I don't know, but I think this particular research was 1 tablespoon 4 times a day for 14 days and then 37 days with no other external influence. Okay, so now let's talk about EFAs. We mentioned them briefly earlier. What are EFAs? EFAs are essential fatty acids. And there's some confusion about EFAs with EPA and DHA and flax oil and fish oil and evening primrose oil. These are actually different. And then there's omega-3s, omega-6s, and omega-9s. But for the sake of what I'm talking about tonight, I'm talking about fish oil. I'm not talking about evening primrose oil, which is very good for hormones. Flax oil is very good for women and hormones. But for brain, you really want fish oil. It has different EPA, DHA ratio than the other healthy. There's plenty of healthy oils. It's not the only one. It's just that fish oil, this particular research I'm citing, is from fish oil, not the other oil. So it has specific brain and cognitive function enhancement. It promotes positive mood and well-being. It supports memory and learning ability. It supports focus and attention. It may help slow the progression of age-related memory loss. It protects the nerve and brain cells from oxidative stress and damage. And EFAs with EPA and DHA are high in deep-water oily fish such as sardines, tuna, and mackerel. Good sources that are contaminant-free are important. I just want to mention something here. Sometimes my clients will ask me, well, I don't want to buy your fish oil. I don't care really whose fish oil they buy. I'm going to tell you a few really good sources. But let's say they go to Costco and they buy, 5,000 fish oil gel caps for like $10. There's just no way that that is even possible, because if you're going to some uncontaminated something in the Atlantic Sea that is high in EPA, DHA, and it's been mercury tested and it's been Fukushima radiation tested, they're not going to be selling it for $10. So I think that I don't say this about everything because I do think biotin is biotin, and I do think chromium is pretty much chromium, and they're both really super inexpensive. But when you're talking about fish oil, especially what's going on in the world and in the oceans, and just pollution and contamination and Fukushima and all that, I'm sorry, I'm going to spend $20 on fish oil or $25. The sources I like that I have, but they're also well documented and they're very highly tested, are Nordic Naturals, which you can find at almost any health food store. They're a very popular brand. They spend more money on research, on cardiovascular learning and brain research than all the other companies combined. And then I use also Apex's Ultra D, which is a high form of D, but it's basically a fish oil in the right ratio of EPA, DHA that you want. There's other great brands out there. It's just that I don't carry them all. And there's also the difference on fish oil between emulsified, which is almost like which is Apex. Apex's is like an emulsified fish oil, which means it's like pre-digested. So it's going to get through the body and convert better, or the other products that you might need an additional digestive enzyme with. And then the last tip on fish oil is it says a digestive enzyme with hydrochloric acid or HCl and bile may be needed with fish oil for proper utilization. This is how you know. If you take fish oil, or whether you do or not, but if you're having a fat digestion issue, then when you go to the bathroom and you have elimination and it's a stool, it'll float. So if you're not breaking down fats properly, then your poop will basically float. If it's breaking down properly, it will sink. So some people always have this like debate about sink and float, and you want it to sink. If you don't, then that's one thing. The other thing is if you're taking a liquid fish oil and you notice ever like what I'd call little oil spills or oil droplets in the toilet, and you'll notice that if you look before you flush, then basically that fish oil or that evening primrose or whatever oil you're taking went completely through your system undigested. You should not see spots or drops or anything of oil in the toilet at all. And if you do, then you definitely need a digestive enzyme. Another thing that's not true all the time, but it can be true, is if you're using kind of a cheap or not emulsified fish oil product, some people are more likely to burp up that fish oil taste and they don't like it, or they think that it's like a bad reaction. That's definitely a sign that you need a digestive enzyme. Because if you're getting that gel cap or liquid and then you burp up that fishy flavor, it's because the body couldn't process it correctly. So those would all be tips for digestive enzymes. Okay, so the next question is, are EFAs and Intramax? No, there's not a good source of EFAs and Intramax. And what I've heard is the reason is because of oxidation and also because of taste. Some people, there's EFAs like Nordic Naturals has some in like orange flavor, strawberry flavor, and it's natural flavoring. It doesn't really not make it taste like fish oil, but it kind of masks the taste. There's even one that's like an orange cream for kids, and it actually tastes pretty good. But Intramax is not a good source of iron or EFAs. And then the next question is, are EFAs recommended for kids who squirm around and have difficulty focusing and concentrating, and how would you dose it? For kids, I would dose, depends on what form, but I like the Nordic Naturals cream. They come in little individual squirt things. I don't know what the milligrams of that is, or a teaspoon if you're talking about like a liquid of some other brand that's like a liquid flavored, like lemon, orange, strawberry, then I would do a teaspoon for children. Unless they get up to, like over 80 pounds, then I would dose them like an adult on fish oil. It can be the essential fatty acids would help, but it also could be, I would definitely check choline, because acetylcholine also has that thing of focusing, squirming, and concentrating that we covered earlier. So I would suspect there's a choline deficiency as well. By the way, there's a lot of good books. This did not come from those books, but there's some books out there like Dr. Amen and a few others that have extensive books about brain chemistry and amino acid therapy, and they have exhaustive lists of symptoms if you're acetylcholine deficient or dopamine deficient, or, so you answer all these questions, and then depending on how you score, it puts you in one category or another, or it might show that you have 2 or 3 deficiencies. And I'm sure that some of that is online as well. So if you want to look into that more, and maybe the list tonight are not enough to convince you, you can get those paperback books for under $20, and it might be worth it to get a really full analysis, because they have to do with, how you make choices, or one thing you prefer over something else, and they're maybe more definitive because there's just a whole lot more to them. And I think there's some books like Brain Code or Brain Factor, pretty much anything by Dr. Amen. There's a lot of resources out there, but I'm sure you can find it online too. If we have time at the end, I'll do a search and just show you. Okay, MSG and aspartame, this is the reference I was talking about, Excitotoxins, the Taste That Kills, by Dr. Blaylock. So this is a pretty interesting story that he tells. He's a neurosurgeon, and his specialty was disrupting the blood-brain barrier for when there was brain tumors or tumors in the head. And the reason they had to do that was because most people are born with a natural protection called the blood-brain barrier, that's a membrane in the neck that's supposed to keep certain food chemicals and toxins out of the brain. But to get chemo into the brain, they have to disrupt this blood-brain barrier on purpose, or it would block the chemotherapy, because those are chemical drugs. And so as a neurosurgeon, what he noticed was a high incidence of Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, ADHD, and stuff after they disrupted the blood-brain barrier. And most of his colleagues said, well, that's normal because they had a brain tumor, so of course they are going to have more, propensity to have Alzheimer's or dementia. And then, as the more he researched and looked into it, he said, no, it's not that. We're causing those conditions because we're taking away the natural protection from the brain. So then these people are more sensitive to aspartame and MSG. And anyway, his book is pretty convincing. It's each chapter goes into these different neurological conditions. I think maybe he mentions Lou Gehrig's, and there's a few other things in there. But he really talks about the history and the politics and everything behind MSG and aspartame. And I've heard lots of stories about that since reading his book, but it was required reading when I got my naturopathic degree, and since then I've just heard a ton. But there was a lot of controversy with the FDA approving both aspartame and MSG, and this was under Reagan's administration. I think it's, I don't like or dislike Reagan. I don't have an opinion because I was too young when he was president to know much about politics. But, he died of Alzheimer's, and supposedly he was a huge Diet Coke drinker. And I think that that's pretty interesting. But they took and appointed the head of the FDA from Searle at the time, and that guy got MSG passed, even though it was an aspartame. There were supposed to be original warnings that you weren't supposed to heat it. It wasn't supposed to be in hot foods. It wasn't supposed to be used with certain neurological conditions. None of those warnings made it to labels and packaging, and many countries have banned or outlawed MSG and aspartame, except the U.S. The U.S. it's sickening. It's so prevalent. MSG is hidden in packaged foods, and it's called many things. So if you look at a label, first of all, if it's smaller than 1% of the food ingredients, they don't even have to list it at all. But some of the names for MSG include monosodium glutamate, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, yeast extract, and natural flavorings. And so your package of whatever you're eating could say natural flavorings, and it's MSG. So, and a lot of people assume, which is wrong, that if you go to, I say Whole Foods because most people know what Whole Foods is, but it can be Sunflower Market or Sprouts or any of these places. Just because you're going there doesn't mean you're getting MSG-free foods. If it says natural flavorings on the package, you don't know what that is. I mean, why don't they list what that is? So that's one thing. And the reason MSG can be called natural flavorings is it starts with, like, basically, if you think about, this is how MSG is made. If you think about the produce section at the grocery store, you're seeing all the pretty stuff, the stuff that, made it all the way from wherever, South America to Kroger. And there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make it that far, like rotten cucumbers or moldy stuff or whatever. And a lot of that stuff is thrown in a big vat and boiled. So there's your natural flavorings, because the original source is basically rotting vegetables. And then they use like chemical extracts and derivatives to extract the flavor, which is that kind of, you know, like if you boil soup or vegetables, you get kind of that brownish thing at the top of the foam. That's what MSG is. So it is actually coming from vegetables. That's why they can call it that. But it's the chemicals that's used to derive or extract the flavor that is neurotoxic. Anyway, Blaylock goes through a complete explanation of this, and I think is very good. And if you're dealing with any of these conditions, you have to buy this book. Okay, if you have some less serious things, like just brain fog and poor short-term memory, I made a little list of those too. Some of these are repeats, but they're important to point out because brain fog and poor short-term memory are very common. I have a client story to tell you guys that there was a young woman who came in to see me about a month ago. Maybe she's 30, and you know, she has a good job. She seems to have her act together. She seems very smart. And you know, as I'm going through that, she's not taking notes, and she's like, "Oh, no, I got it." You know, she's like, "I remember everything I said." And then I'm like, "Okay, I really suggest you take notes." No, you know, I'm fine, and all this other stuff. Well, anyway, in her particular issue, she had some hormone challenges, and but she didn't want to get off birth control. And I said, well, there's some things we can't fix on birth control, so you just have to understand that we cannot fix those. Over the course of a month, she has asked me directly the same question about 8 different times by phone, email, and text, like she's never asked me this question before. She has no recollection that she's asked me this question or what the answer is. And this is like something I see a lot, you know, where people really, I don't want to say, you know, brain dead's too harsh, but they're kind of like, they can't retain it, you know. So when you have kids that, you know, can't remember what you tell them to do, or your husband or your wife or whoever can't remember things that you're asking them to do or request, think of this little category, because it may not be that it's selective memory and they don't want to, you know, remember. It could be that they really biochemically can't remember. So anyway, the list is poor nutrition, which we've covered all of these things by now, amino acids, essential fatty acids, vitamins, and mineral deficiencies, low iron or anemia, which is also low blood oxygen, poor circulation, and we've already talked about that with arterial congestion and that whole list of symptoms, low adrenal and low thyroid function, again, which can be confirmed with your oral body temperature. And brain fog and poor short-term memory are common with chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. This is something that I learned firsthand because I had that, so both things. And also when I learned all this from Dr. Roger Murphy's, who said he called it fibro fog. I call it kind of brain fog. But if you kind of feel like you're in a fog and days go by and you just don't feel crisp and clear and have it going on and you're not sharp, then you should think in this category. But that might mean, you know, but anyway, chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia is the same list anyway. It's nutrition, it's circulation, it's adrenal, it's thyroid. And then these conditions can also be common with parasites, candida, and other toxic conditions, which goes back to our detox workshop in January. And so if there's parasites making you anemic, or candida causing blood congestion, or some other, you know, kind of chemical overload, I would really work to identify those. I know I'm going to do a little advertisement here, but if you really want to get into this kind of stuff, like big time, that's this weekend. This 3 days this weekend is going to be pulling every one of these things apart, going a little bit slower, but it's all in help one another, making notes, really not just self-identifying for your own needs, but having that ability that if someone has poor short-term memory, you can just go into the back of Hannah's resource and go, okay, what would be the underlying causes? But we're going to do it like, okay, so this is 2 hours and that's 24 hours. So we're going to be able to cover a whole lot of material. Okay, so the next one, learning disorders. Now, I am going to spend a whole lot more time on this subject next month for childhood conditions, but I had to include it in brain power. But this is the basic list, and I'm going to go through this one kind of quickly, and then I'm going to go up to a few announcements and last questions. So On learning disorders, it is so important for kids to avoid MSG and aspartame. You know, sometimes they're having Hot Pockets in the morning that has MSG. They're having the institutional school lunch loaded with MSG. Then they're doing the drive-through at dinner because of the busy schedule loaded with MSG. So they're really not getting any meals that don't have MSG. And when you're talking about learning disorders, that's super important. Low adrenal function, this can be because of poor sleep habits, which is also further down the list, but this can also definitely affect focus and concentration. Poor nutrition, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of families that don't eat home-cooked meals, ever. Like, everything's popped in a microwave, or everything is, you know, something that's basically considered fast food. Vaccine residues, we're going to go into this in great detail next month, especially the multi-vaccines such as MMR and DPT. Metals residue, like from dental work or vaccines, can be a big underlying cause for learning disorders. Sleep, I've already mentioned. Electronics. Kids are addicted to electronics. You know, cell phone, iPad, video games, all this stuff. And it's funny how young this is a problem. I've had some kids come in, like this year, like already, that are 6 and 8 years old. And I remember this one little boy, I mean, he was showing adrenal and sleep issues all over his scan. And I was asking him how much sleep he gets. And the mom was like, well, he sleeps 11 hours a night. And I'm like, I don't think so. I was like, what time? I asked her first, what time does he go to bed? 8 o'clock at night. What time does he get up? 7 a.m. And he's not saying anything. And he's 8. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going to ask you, what time do you actually go to sleep? And he kind of looked at me, and then I could tell he didn't want to say anything. And I'm like, what time do you think you actually go to sleep? And he's like, I don't know, 1 or 2. I said, what time do you get up? Oh, 7 when mom's in there, and he has a hard time getting up. I said, why are you not sleeping? Well, it's because of his phone. He has a phone, an iPhone at 8 years old, and he's doing games, and he's looking up stuff and all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, oh, my gosh. So that's a problem with kids texting and all that stuff. And then there's this last part where there's this random M there that's, you know, these sensitive kids and affecting learning. And we're going to go through that a lot next month because that's something I've been seeing for about 6 or 7 years. Okay, I am having a special this month on brain products, so especially the amino acids in all forms, or EFAs. So any of the amino acid sprays, the pills, the essential fatty acids, anything, you know, that we talked about specifically for the brain is 20% off. So if you want any products, what I would please recommend you do is be specific. Like if you say, I want that thing for dopamine, well, that thing could be a pill, a liquid, it could be a lot of possibilities. So please give me more information than that. And I would need, if you're not already a client and I don't have your mailing address, I would need your mailing address and a phone number to get your credit card number. I don't have any problem with you trying products that, like, wherever you normally go. I know the ones I use work. I know I've had great success with them. Sometimes, you know, they're not all equal just because of who manufactures them or whatever, but there's plenty of great products out there. The next webinar, which is in April, is these topics under childhood issues. We're going to go into great more detail on learning disorders, behavioral issues, children's nutrition essentials, vaccine residues, common emotional conflicts causing physical symptoms for kids, like separation conflict, digestion, remedies safe for children, including proper dosages, common physical complaints, and electronics and radiation effects on children, and more scientific and research oriented. And I'm putting this up here because after these webinars, some people call and ask me this information. I'm actually going to just leave this on the screen until we run out of time, which I think is about just like in a minute or two. What I would like you to do is know that I have 3 different rate structures. One's for adults over 25 years old, and it's $150 for new clients. For kids under 18, it's $25 for 45 minutes. They just don't usually have that much wrong with them. And then for kids 18 to 25, basically college-age kids, I still count them as kids, and they are $75 for 1 hour. And because of my crazy busy schedule, I have just started a new prepaid policy for new clients. This is not true for old existing clients, but this is true for new clients. Just because if someone cancels or doesn't show up, it's really inconvenient, and there's usually a waiting list for people that need to come in the same week as an emergency. So it's just time that I implemented the prepayment. And prior to the appointment, I'll need your date of birth and place of birth with detail of your current health issues, symptoms, health questions, health history, plus the list of what you're currently taking, Natura prescription. So that's what to do if you want an appointment. Let me just see what else is on here. I'll go back to the appointment thing in a second and leave it on the screen. So thank you for attending. 2 hours is a lot of time to listen to health information, so I appreciate you taking the time. Hopefully it's helped you. A recording of tonight's webinar will be sent out by email within 2 weeks of tonight. Please allow 2 weeks. A lot of people start asking me the next day, and I have to render the recording and then get it in a newsletter, which is not so easy with a schedule like the Hannah one coming up this weekend. So just give me a little bit of time, and save the link to your computer to play it directly for best results. Otherwise, I get a lot of emails saying it didn't download completely. Feel free to pass on and share the recording. I want as much people to get this information as possible. Probably this month, I'm going to try to put these and post them on YouTube just to make it easier to access under like a channel with my name on it. And please note, I only have time to respond to emails with health questions of current clients. At this point, I'm only getting the emails as far as really getting to emails twice a week. And so if someone emails me with a ton of questions and I don't even know them and I have never done a scan on them, they're kind of hard to answer anyway. I'm not rude and just ignore them, but it's best in that case just to go and schedule an appointment. And that's the end of the slideshow. So I'm going to go right back here to the appointment. There is a question up. There we go. So if you don't have any questions and you want to hang up, we're pretty much done. I'm just going to go through any questions that come up. So I just got some thanks and good valuable information, so that's great. And I hope you guys, I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording though. So if you're on the call and you want to write anything down about the appointments, feel free, but I am going to